very good evening. You're watching The Money Show on ET Now. I'm Mubina Kapasi. This is the show where we get you all the latest news, views and updates when it comes to personal finances. Ensure that you are on the right path. Your portfolio as well is on the path for your long-term wealth creation. So here's what we're going to discuss today on the show. First up, it's the very first day of a brand new month, which means I'm sure that many of you have received your monthly salaries. So how exactly should you ensure that you are putting your monthly incomes to proper use is what we will be discussing today on the show. What should be that ideal split of sorts between incomes, investments, savings? How exactly should you go about budgeting your monthly expenses within a certain amount of income? And unfortunately, many of us have also received a salary cut. So all the more, budgeting is extremely important during the times of this crisis that we are in the midst of. So we'll be talking about that with Mr. Harsh Roongta. He'll be joining us in just a bit from now. Later on the show, in our Meet Your Fund Manager segment, we will be continuing our conversation on value funds. Value funds in general have borne the brunt of, the last couple of years of a lot of things in the market. But additionally, what's interesting is that the recent AMFI data indicates that month after month, individuals and retail investors especially have decided to press the redeem button in an increasing manner, especially in value funds. Yes, in general, equity mutual funds have been seeing this net outflow of sorts, but it's all the more amplified when it comes to value funds. And finally, in our Spend with TMS segment, we'll be talking about cars. We're going to be talking about the most popular cars of the festive season that you could keep an eye out for. So let's now welcome on the show Mr. Harsh Roongta. He joins us now. Mr. Roongta, thank you so much for joining in, and I hope you've had a lovely long weekend. So Mr. Roongta, many a times us as individuals, we get our monthly salary. The tendency is, of course, to, immediately start writing our checks to pay down our bills, or all that long pending shopping for us, for our family. All of that, usually the money is used towards. We often also defer things away to the beginning of the next month because we may be running low on cash towards the end of the month. So let's start off first with how should you ensure that you're properly utilizing the salary? Is this the right approach that many of us tend to adopt, where we get our paycheck and then we start paying down our bills or start shopping for things that we had deferred in the end of the last month?
I think a good thing to do, now a thing to do would be to track your expenditure and make sure that where you are spending, etc. But I think in the real world, it's very tough to keep track of your expenditure. So I think what you need to do is to sort of put a cap on your expenditure by having two separate accounts. Have an income come investment account and have an expenditure account. Make sure that whatever you estimate as your expenditure, you put that in the expenditure account. This should be two separate bank accounts. Okay, and then spend only from that expenditure account. That can be via debit card, online. You can also withdraw cash, although I think debit and online is better because you can go back and track what you spent it on. Now, the advantage of this mode is that at some point, if you have underestimated your expenditure, the money will run out. And at that stage, you would have to transfer additional funds, and that introduces a pause before you spend the money. And a great way to spend money on discretionary items like eating out, shopping, etc., is to transfer exactly those amounts into the expenditure account so that you stay within budget. So I think the key is keep separate expenditure account that creates an overall cap. Of course, if you need more money, you will transfer it from your income account, but it creates a pause. It creates what I would call a pain of paying, and that enables you to relook at that expenditure and maybe defer it, cancel it, or at least be aware of it. I think what this does is it forces you to become aware of where your money is going. If increasingly you are running out of money from your expenditure account, then you can keep, uh, you will go back and check where you have spent it on, and that will make you more aware about how your money is going and where it is going.
So I think that's a wonderful way essentially to track your expenses, to manage your expenses. And that's of course just one part of where, your monthly income could essentially be utilized. You perhaps put a certain percentage away into that separate bank account of sorts, which could be utilized only for expenses. And because you're spending from that account, there's already a ready account of where all have you spent. Which bucket do you tend to spend more on? Which bucket, was perhaps an unnecessary item of expenditure, which is a learning lesson as well, right, for the coming months, that maybe you could cut down on an XYZ particular item of expenses. So in that way, it sort of does make sense. Mr. Roongta, let's talk now about the other bit of it, and that is utilization of income apart from expenses. We say you must save for a rainy day. We say that you must save a part of your money to invest as well for your future or for your other financial goals as well. Sometimes I feel we ask too much of our monthly income, to deliver so many items, and it just seems so difficult. So how do you suggest, that, I mean, I know you spoke about the expenses bit, but how do you believe that, individuals should divvy up their income between investment, saving? What's your strategy over there?
I mean, of course, it will depend on individual to individual. People with higher salaries can definitely save higher percentages as well. Not just the same percentage being a higher amount, but even higher percentage also, because some expenditure remains after a certain point constant. I think there is no real thumb rule, but the various thumb rules. I think the younger you are, the higher should be the percentage of what you invest. And before you invest, I think you should learn to save. And therefore, out of this, just like we transfer something into expenditure, it is great if at the beginning itself, a certain percentage, it could be 20. If you are younger and can afford more, it could be 30. Okay, a percent. Just shift it to at least a saving account, maybe a recurring deposit. Okay, if of course you can do a systematic investment plan into an index fund, or if the need is into a tax saving equity fund, that's great for a younger person. Okay, for a slightly older person, he should definitely look at investment. I think the key is to do things slowly. First, get used to the fact that certain portion is meant for expenditure, and this is how I will physically control it. This portion is saving cum investment. It goes out the moment it comes in. The balance is a little bit of discretionary expenditure, which also I will transfer to the expenditure account as and when I'm incurring that expenditure, so that I become aware that I'm spending this on a discretionary item. So I think a combination of these three would work well. Lest you think this works only for middle income or lower income people, this works beautifully even for higher income people. There are people with earnings that are greater than a crore of rupees a year, for whom also this works beautifully. This breakup of expenditure and income works well for them as well.
All right. So that's of course coming on the bit on how essentially you can manage all of your requirements within that income that you get. And I understand that it would be even tougher for a lot of you, especially who may have got an income cut, their salaries may yet not be restored. Mr. Roongta, let's talk about that. Any particular note that you would like to observe for these individuals who may have had a pay cut? the pay cut could be quite substantial as well. So which bucket, and I'm sure discretionary will be the first bucket that you would advise these people slash down. What are the other buckets you'd recommend they cut down now on? Essentials like, what we say, food, clothing, shelter, of course, is non-negotiable. So what are the other buckets you would recommend they cut down?
I mean, if your pay is cut and probably the situation is temporary, then obviously during that temporary phase while you adjust, one is obviously the top candidate is discretionary. Post discretionary, you can suspend investments also for a while. I think it is pretty tough, especially when you are having a tough time, to try and economize on needs also. I think you just need to get used to first trying to manage by first cutting out discretionary, maybe suspending investments for a while, as long as it's not for too long, but still at least staying within your comfort zone on the necessities, whether it is your food, or whether it is your clothing, or whether it is obviously rent. At least during the time when you are getting adjusted to a stressful situation of a pay cut, this could be a small little reward that you give yourself by sticking to your budget on necessities, not trying to cut that down as well.
All right. Okay, there you have it. That's, of course, just an additional note, an additional tip for those individuals who have unfortunately had to sort of go through with an income cut. Some of them, of course, have had to make drastic changes as well in their lifestyle. Mr. Roongta, when it comes to investments, and let's talk about those individuals who are sort of new in the world of investing. You mentioned that the ones who are younger should definitely have a higher percentage of their income that they should put aside for their savings and their investments, because obviously at this juncture their expenses are still relatively low, so they can afford to put a bit more in their investment kitty. The question is, as a minimum, where would you recommend they start off? And in India, we have a culture where usually youngsters tend to live with their parents for some time. So thankfully, even housing at this juncture is not, too much of a worry for these individuals. So they have, their income to use at their discretion. So where would you recommend these youngsters start off?
I think, again, as I said, it's tough. I mean, if you're professionally qualified and you're having a good, income, probably you could do as much as, 30-35%. Okay. But if your income is not that high, then maybe I think 20% would be the absolute minimum that you should definitely invest right from your first salary. Just assume whatever is your income, it's actually only 80%. The balance 20% is not meant for you, it is meant for your future you. So I think, and make that automatic. And as I said, initially it is not investment, initially it is just getting used to saving. I think investments will happen if you save. And in the current environment, they will definitely happen. So I think first, initially, you need to make sure that you are at least saving that, putting that aside, not available for expenditure, either necessities or, discretionary.
All right. Okay, so some important lessons coming in from Mr. Roongta on this topic that, well, I guess is something sometimes all of us do tend to ask. Don't start off by, starting by paying your bills and, going shopping when you get your income. Ensure that you follow the steps that Mr. Roongta has given for better and more efficient income and salary management, so that you don't have that end of the month syndrome where all of us sort of tend to postpone or push any other items that we needed, and sometimes they can be of emergency nature as well. So in such situations, it's all the more important that you are not in such a situation. All right, let's take on board some questions and queries that we have received from our viewers. Remember, folks, you too can get in touch with us. You can write into us on The Money Show at etnow.tv. So let's take on board our very first question. Tanvi Gupta says, I had a question on NPS or National Pension Scheme as a retirement tool. As an investor, one can only withdraw 60% of the total amount after retirement, and the rest 40% is an annuity on a monthly basis. She takes a hypothetical example. She says, as an investor, I have the matured amount of say 3 crore rupees after retirement. So I withdraw 1.8 crore rupees, and the balance 1.2 crores would be the annuity provider for a payment of monthly pension. Now she is asking, is it not possible to withdraw this amount, as it's a huge amount which remains invested and would provide good returns to the annuity provider, while as an investor, I only get to receive some percent of this amount as monthly pension? Or are there options to receive it as a monthly pension while the pension holder is alive, and on death of the pension holder, the remaining amount is given to nominees? Mr. Roongta, since I have you and since we've been asked this question on NPS, let's get in your overall take on National Pension Scheme and, of course, Tanvi's answer, or rather your answer to Tanvi's question.
So first, let me take up Tanvi's question before we take the broader question. I think there is a slight misunderstanding, so I'm going to restate what Tanvi said. If she is buying annuity for 1 crore 20 lakhs, roughly the annuity would be say 60,000 rupees a month. I think her fear is that I start off the annuity, I take it for a month, and at the end of the month, suppose I die. That means I've lost my entire 1 crore 20 lakhs. Okay, I think that is the fear that Tanvi is making out. So to assuage her and any other viewers who are looking at this, there are various kinds of annuity. One annuity obviously is of the kind that we just mentioned, that if you buy 1 crore 20 lakhs, you will get the pension annuity till you are alive. The day you die, the annuity stops. Now, as far as this thing is concerned, you can also get an annuity where you will continue to get the annuity while you are alive, but after your death, the money gets transferred to the nominee, whosoever you have nominated. You have both options, and there are multiple options in between. Obviously, the one where your nominee doesn't get anything, the pension amount is higher because you are running a risk that you may die too early. Where your nominee gets back the full premium, the full principal, obviously the pension amount would be lower, but the options are available. So that's, I think, is what I want to tell Tanvi and your viewers. As far as NPS is concerned, I think it is a excellent option, at least to the extent of specific tax benefits that are available for NPS. So one big push to the NPS has been this 10% of salary that is allowed to be contributed by the employer tax-free. That's without any limit. And I think that has been a major reason why the non-governmental NPS figures have gone up so much. Plus the additional 50,000 available over and above the 1,50,000. That is available for other tax saving instrument. There is an exclusive limit of 50,000 only for NPS. To the extent of these exclusive limits of tax free, the returns from NPS get pushed up, and I think it is a good product.
All right. So yeah, perhaps there is a bit of a typo on Tanvi's end, and that's Mr. Roongta's recommendation to Tanvi and to all those individuals who are perhaps interested in the National Pension Scheme, how it works, what the structure is like, especially post-retirement. Okay, we have Augustus D'Souza, who requests Mr. Harsh Roongta to review his portfolio. So he's got I think a 7,500 rupee per month SIP going, and he's split this 7,500 rupees in the Aditya Birla Sun Life Pure Value Fund, the Franklin India Smaller Companies Growth Fund, and the HDFC Top 100 Fund, which of course in this last 1 odd year has faced some hiccups. Now he says that my advisor says I should redeem the Franklin India Smaller Companies Fund. Do you think I should do so? So let's assume that he's a long-term investor. He's sort of investing for wealth creation. He wants to take this money that he earns and he wants to take aside 7,500 rupees, investing it in mutual funds. Mr. Roongta, what do you make of these three funds? One is a value fund, one is a small cap fund, and one is of course a large and mid cap fund of sorts, the top 100 fund. Do you think this is a good portfolio? Do you think he should perhaps add some more if he has the appetite to do so?
My point is, I think as the category is very, very important, and I think one assumes that the category has been chosen after some degree of diligence. As far as the funds themselves is concerned, you have yourself said earlier in the program that value funds now haven't been doing well for quite some time. The top 100 fund you just mentioned also hasn't done all that well. The smaller companies fund, the small companies fund typically have done well across. This particular fund may not have done that well because of issues specific to that particular fund house, which is Franklin, which may have nothing probably to do with the fund itself, this particular scheme itself. But I think if he wants to reduce the risk, although he wants to continue with the allocation on smaller companies, I would choose a small cap index fund. Today, a small cap index fund is available at very, very competitive expense ratios from Nippon India as well as Motilal Oswal, and I think we will see more of them come up. But as of now, these two people have the small cap index fund, and which is something that they should Mr. D'Souza should look at doing.
All right. Well, yes, in fact, we are going to be discussing, the value funds as well in just a bit with Meenakshi Davar. She's going to be joining us. Of course, she is Nippon India's value fund manager. So in our Meet Your Fund Manager segment, we'll be talking to her. But I think on that note, we are out of time. We have received a couple of questions, but guess what, folks? We'll be back tomorrow and day after to get those questions answered. Mr. Roongta, always a pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for taking out time today for The Money Show.